It was meant to be the most exclusive gala of the season, where Manhattan's elite gathered beneath imported Venetian chandeliers and million-dollar art installations. But what began as a celebration of power and privilege would end with a billionaire raising a whip against his pregnant wife in front of 400 horrified witnesses. What he didn't realize was that the woman he was breaking had been silently enduring his cruelty for months, and that her father, one of the most feared CEOs in the country, was about to walk through those doors. This is a story of calculated abuse, ignored warnings, and a moment when corporate power became a weapon of protection. Stay with us, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Let us know what time you're watching from, and drop a comment below. We want to hear your thoughts on this. The Grand Bellevue Hotel had been transformed into a shrine of excess that evening. Gold-trimmed columns rose toward coffered ceilings painted with classical scenes, while waiters in white gloves moved silently through crowds of society's most powerful figures. The air smelled of imported roses and aged whiskey. Violin music drifted through conversations about mergers, elections, and vacation homes in the Hamptons. Photographers positioned themselves strategically, capturing moments that would appear in tomorrow's society pages. No one present could have imagined that this same glittering space would soon become a crime scene. Maria Moore stood near the French windows overlooking Central Park, one hand resting protectively on her belly. Her powder blue silk gown, elegant but understated, had been chosen by Alfred that morning. He controlled everything now. What she wore, who she spoke to, even how she held her champagne glass. At 6 months pregnant, she felt the weight of the baby and the weight of her gilded prison pressing down on her simultaneously. Her dark hair was pulled back in a chignon that was beginning to come loose, and beneath her carefully applied makeup, exhaustion had carved shadows under her eyes. She tried to keep her expression neutral, the practiced smile of a billionaire's wife who knew she was always being watched. But her hand shook slightly as she adjusted the delicate chain around her neck, a gift from Alfred, though she now understood it as another collar, another marker of ownership. Across the ballroom, Alfred Jackson commanded attention effortlessly. He stood at the center of a circle of admirers, hedge fund managers, politicians, tech moguls, all laughing at his jokes, all eager for his approval. His charcoal gray suit was custom-tailored in Milan, his watch worth more than most people's homes. At 38, he had built an empire through ruthless intelligence and a talent for reading people's weaknesses. Tonight, he was the honored guest, the philanthropist being celebrated for his generous donation to children's hospitals. The irony wasn't lost on Maria. Maria had taken the test 3 times before she allowed herself to believe it. Each time, the 2 pink lines appeared with quiet certainty, transforming her entire world in the span of 90 seconds. She sat on the cold marble floor of their penthouse bathroom, the 3rd test still clutched in her trembling hand, and felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. A child. Their child. Perhaps this would soften Alfred, remind him of the man she thought she'd married 2 years ago when he'd quoted poetry and promise of the world. She found him in his study that evening, surrounded by screens displaying stock tickers and acquisition targets. He didn't look up when she entered, his fingers flying across his keyboard as he finalized some deal that would make him richer and someone else destitute. She stood in the doorway for a full minute before he acknowledged her presence with an irritated glance. "Alfred," she said softly, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. "I have something to tell you. Something wonderful." He finally turned, his expression unreadable. In the blue glow of his monitors, his handsome features looked carved from ice. "I'm in the middle of something, Maria. Make it quick." She crossed the room, sitting in the leather chair across from his desk, and told him. The words tumbled out faster than she intended, hope making her voice bright despite his coldness. She told him about the test, about the doctor's appointment she'd scheduled for next week, about how she'd always dreamed of being a mother. She even dared to reach across the desk for his hand. Alfred was silent for exactly 7 seconds. She counted them. Then his lips curved into something that might have been a smile on another man's face, but on his looked predatory. "More air," he said quietly, almost to himself. How convenient. The hope inside her chest began to curdle. "Alfred, this is our baby. Our family." He stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked Manhattan's glittering skyline. His reflection in the glass looked like a stranger. "Our family," he repeated, his tone mocking. "Tell me, Maria, does your father know yet?" "I want to tell you first. I thought we could tell him together, maybe this weekend when—" "No." He turned back to face her, and something in his eyes made her want to run. "We'll tell Charles exactly when I decide we tell him, after we've made some necessary arrangements." She felt the baby's presence inside her like a small flame, something precious that needed protecting. "What arrangements?" Alfred walked to his desk and pulled out a leather portfolio she'd never seen before. He opened it with deliberate care, revealing a thick legal document. "I had my attorneys draw this up months ago. Just a precaution, you understand. But now it's become rather urgent." "I don't understand. We already have a prenup. This is different. A postnuptial agreement that clarifies certain matters regarding any potential children." He slid the document across the desk toward her. "It ensures that our child's inheritance from the Moore estate is properly managed. By me, of course, as the father. Your father's empire is substantial, Maria. Someone needs to protect it for the next generation." She stared at the document as if it were a snake. The words blurred on the page, but she caught phrases that made her blood run cold. Sole financial guardian, irrevocable trust, managed exclusively by Alfred Jackson. This wasn't about protecting their child. This was about controlling Charles Moore's fortune. "You want me to sign away our baby's inheritance before the child is even born? I want you to be intelligent about this family's future." His voice had taken on the edge she'd learned to fear, the tone that preceded his cruelty. "Your father built an empire, but he's getting old, Maria. Sloppy. Someone needs to ensure that empire doesn't crumble. Someone needs to position themselves properly." The truth hit her with devastating clarity. The courtship, the marriage, the charm that had swept her off her feet. It had all been a hostile takeover disguised as love. She was never his wife. She was access, a key to unlock her father's kingdom. And now their baby would be the same. "I won't sign this," she whispered. Alfred's smile vanished. He moved around the desk with frightening speed, his hand gripping her arm hard enough to bruise. "You will sign it, Maria. You'll sign it because you're my wife, because that child is mine, and because everything you have, everything you are, belongs to me now." He released her suddenly, smoothing his suit jacket as if nothing had happened. "You have until Friday. After that, things become more difficult for you." Maria refused to sign on Friday. She told herself it was courage, but really it was the instinct of a mother protecting her unborn child from a predator. Alfred had simply nodded, his expression pleasant, almost understanding. Then he'd made a phone call that would unravel her entire world. The first blow came through her phone on Saturday morning. Text messages from 3 of her closest friends, all worded slightly differently, but carrying the same message. They needed space. They hoped she understood. They wished her well. No explanation. Just sudden, surgical amputation of relationships she'd nurtured for years. When she tried calling, none of them answered. Their voicemails were full. By Monday, she understood why. Page 6 had run a blind item about a prominent socialite with a shopping addiction who'd allegedly stolen jewelry from charity auction previews. The details were vague enough to maintain deniability, but specific enough that everyone in their circle knew exactly who it described. Maria had never stolen anything in her life, but the lie didn't need be true. It only needed to be whispered. Tuesday brought an anonymous tip to a gossip columnist about her erratic behavior at a recent luncheon. The columnist described how she'd allegedly berated a server and thrown a glass of wine. Maria hadn't even attended that luncheon. She'd been at a prenatal appointment, watching her baby's heartbeat flicker on an ultrasound screen, while Alfred was supposedly at a board meeting. Now she knew what he'd really been doing. The blows came faster after that, each one carefully calibrated to isolate her further. A photograph appeared online showing her leaving a medical building, the caption speculating about mystery appointments and concerning behavior. It was her obstetrician's office, but the article made it sound like a psychiatric facility. 3 more friends stopped returning her calls. The doorman at their building began looking at her with poorly concealed pity. Alfred's public relations team was a machine of destruction, And Maria was learning that reputation could be murdered as efficiently as a person. Each manufactured scandal, each strategic leak, each carefully worded concern from friends was another blow. She started counting them because the alternative was losing her mind. 10 stories in the first week. 15 more by the end of the month. Each one a small violence that made her world smaller. Her yoga instructor suddenly had a full schedule with no openings. Her hairstylist assistant called to cancel her standing appointment, citing scheduling conflicts. The coordinator of the charity board she'd served on for 4 years sent a formal letter suggesting she take a leave of absence to focus on her health and family. The subtext was clear. They believed the lies, or they were too afraid of Alfred's influence to stand beside her. She tried to fight back, posting a simple message on social media, defending herself against the accusations. It was deleted within an hour by a technical error, and when she attempted to post again, she discovered Alfred had somehow gained access to all her accounts. Her digital life, like everything else, was under his control. The psychological damage accumulated like compound interest. She stopped going to her favorite cafe after the barista's expression turned from warm to wary. She avoided the park where she used to walk because the other mothers had begun steering their children away from her. Even her own doorman now required her to show identification, though he greeted her by name for 2 years. By her 4th month of pregnancy, she'd been systematically erased from her own social existence. Invitations stopped coming. Phone calls went unreturned. Women she considered friends crossed the street to avoid speaking to her. The isolation was so complete that some days the only voice she heard was Alfred's, and that was always worse than the silence. He never raised his hand to her during those months. He didn't need to. Each manufactured scandal, each ruined friendship, each public humiliation was a blow that left no visible mark. She counted them obsessively in a small notebook she kept hidden in her closet. 40 stories in various publications, 63 former friends who'd cut contact, 97 social events she was uninvited from or subtly discouraged from attending. The numbers climbed while her world shrank. The cruelest blow came when her own cousin sent a formal message through her assistant, stating that Maria was no longer welcome at family gatherings until certain matters were resolved. Alfred had somehow convinced even her own blood that she was unstable, dangerous, a liability. She was 5 months pregnant when she realized she documented over 200 distinct acts of social destruction. 200 times Alfred had used his money, his connections, and his ruthless understanding of human weakness to beat her without ever raising a fist. And he was just getting... Maria chose a Wednesday afternoon to visit her father's office, timing her arrival for when she knew his executive assistant would be at lunch. She couldn't risk anyone intercepting her, couldn't allow Alfred's network of influence to reach her father before she did. The elevator ride to the 63rd floor Moore Tower felt like ascending toward either salvation or final rejection. Her hands trembled as she clutched the manila envelope containing 6 months of carefully documented evidence. Charles Moore's corner office commanded a view of Manhattan that made even billionaires feel small. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a conquest, and her father sat behind his massive desk, reviewing acquisition reports with a focused intensity that had built an empire. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment, she saw something flicker across his face. Concern, perhaps, or recognition of how thin she'd become despite her growing belly. Maria, he stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced efficiency. I didn't know you were coming. Is everything all right? The question almost made her laugh. When had everything last been all right? She crossed the expanse of marble floor, her heels clicking out her desperation. Dad, I need you to look at something. Please, just look at it before you say anything. She spread the contents of the envelope across his desk with shaking hands. Bank statements showing wire transfers from Moore Enterprises subsidiaries to shell corporations registered in Alfred's name. Screenshots of text messages where Alfred detailed his plans to leverage the Moore connection and position himself for the inevitable transition. A recording on her phone of him coaching his PR team on how to manage Maria's public image after she refused to sign the post-nuptial agreement. 6 months of evidence that her marriage was a calculated hostile takeover. Charles picked up the bank statements first, His reading glasses perched on his nose as he scanned the numbers. His expression remained neutral, the same face he wore in boardroom negotiations. These accounts were authorized. Alfred and I have several joint ventures. This is standard business practice. Look at the dates, Dad. Look at when the transfer started. 3 weeks before our wedding. He was already moving your money before he married me. Our money, Maria. When you married Alfred, his financial interests and mine became aligned. That's how these arrangements work. He set down the statements and picked up her phone, listening to 15 seconds of the recording before handing it back. I hear a man managing his wife's public relations during a difficult time. You've been under stress. The pregnancy, the social pressures. He's destroying my reputation systematically. He's isolated me from everyone I know. Dad, he doesn't love me. He never did. I'm just access to you, to more enterprises, to everything you've built. Charles walked his window, hands clasped behind his back in the posture she recognized from childhood when he was about to deliver an unpleasant truth. Maria, I'm going to tell you something I learned building this company. Every marriage at our level is strategic. Your mother understood that. She knew our union combined 2 family fortunes and created something greater. That doesn't make it any less valid. The words hit her like a physical blow. So you think this is normal? You think what he's doing to me is just business. I think you're experiencing what every woman in your position experiences. The adjustment to being married to a powerful man. Alfred can be intense, yes. Controlling, perhaps. But he's also brilliant, ambitious, and he secured 3 major deals for more enterprises in the last year alone. He turned back to face her, and his expression was almost gentle. You're carrying my grandchild, Maria. You're emotional, vulnerable. These feelings will pass. She felt something break inside her chest, a hope she'd been clutching despite everything. I'm showing you proof that he married me to take over your company, and you're telling me I'm emotional? I'm telling you that I've seen 100 men try to outmaneuver me, and Alfred isn't one of them. He's a partner, an asset, and yes, he's your husband. Charles returned to his desk and pressed the intercom button. Sending Garrett. A man Maria had never seen before entered the office. Tall, military bearing, earpiece barely visible. Charles gestured toward her. This is Garrett Mitchell, head of my personal security division. Starting today, you'll have a protection detail. 2 bodyguards, rotating shifts, security upgrades to the penthouse. I won't have my daughter and grandchild at risk. Maria stared at her father in disbelief. You think I need bodyguards? Dad, Alfred is a threat. He's not protecting me. He's imprisoning me. The bodyguards will ensure your safety and give you peace of mind. They'll also keep Alfred from having to worry about your well-being while he's managing both your lives and his business responsibilities. Charles sat back down, already returning his attention to the reports on his desk. You're my daughter, Maria. Everything I've built will eventually be yours and your child's. But you need to trust that I know what I'm doing. I didn't build this empire by being blind to threats. She gathered her evidence with numb fingers, each paper a testament to her father's willful blindness. He saw what he wanted to see, a son-in-law who enhanced his business, a daughter who needed protection from her own fears rather than from her husband. As she left his office, the bodyguard fell into step behind her. Not a shield, she realized, but another set of bars on her cage. The discovery came at 3 a.m. when Maria couldn't sleep, when the baby's movements and her own spiraling thoughts kept her pacing the penthouse like a ghost in her own life. Alfred was in Tokyo on business, or so he'd said. The apartment felt different without his presence. Less like a home and more like a museum. She was trapped inside, surrounded by beautiful things she wasn't allowed to touch. She'd gone to study looking for nothing in particular, perhaps just seeking the transgressive thrill of occupying his space without permission. The room smelled of his cologne and leather, and his computer sat on the desk in sleep mode, its power button glowing softly in the darkness. She hadn't planned to wake it. She hadn't planned any of this. But her hand moved almost of its own accord, and the screen illuminated with a document he'd forgotten to close. It was an email chain, and the subject line made her breath catch. More enterprises, Phase 3 implementation. She sat down slowly, her pregnant belly pressing against the desk edge as she began to read. The first email was from Alfred to someone named Viktor Petrov, dated 8 months ago, 4 months into their marriage. The language was corporate clinical, discussing asset liquidation and strategic positioning with the detachment of a surgeon planning an amputation. But as she scrolled deeper, the full architecture of Alfred's plan revealed itself with horrifying clarity. He wasn't just using her father's trust for joint ventures. He was systematically hollowing out more enterprises from the inside. Her hands shook as she opened the attached spreadsheets. Subsidiary companies her father had built over decades were being quietly drained through a network of shell corporations. Real estate holdings were being transferred to entities Alfred controlled through layers of legal obfuscation. Intellectual property was being licensed to companies that Alfred owned through proxies. The numbers were staggering. Nearly $400 million had already been redirected over the course of their marriage. But it was the timeline document that made her stomach turn. Alfred had planned this for over 2 years. The spreadsheet laid it out with brutal efficiency. 6 months of courtship, marriage by month 7, pregnancy by month 14, complete corporate control by month 36. She was currently at month 18. She was exactly on schedule. There were notes in the margins. Alfred's thoughts reserved in digital amber. Next to Mary Maria Moore, he'd written, "Access granted. Neutralize Charles's suspicions through grandchild." Next to initiate phase 2 transfers, he'd noted wife becoming problematic. Implement reputation management protocol. And there, near the bottom of the timeline, was a line that stopped her heart. Month 24. Remove Charles Moore from operational control. Leverage family crisis if necessary. She opened another folder, this one labeled Insurance. Inside were dozens of files, photographs, documents, recordings, photos of her father at business dinners that had been digitally altered to suggest inappropriate behavior. Fabricated emails made it look like they came from Charles's account, discussing illegal deals and bribery. Audio files that had been spliced together to create incriminating conversations that never happened. Alfred had built an entire arsenal of manufactured evidence designed to destroy her father's reputation and remove him from his own company. The baby kicked hard, as if reacting to her spike of adrenaline. Maria pressed her hand to her belly, trying to breathe through the panic. This wasn't just emotional abuse or financial manipulation. This was corporate warfare, and she'd been the Trojan horse, wheeled through the gates of her father's empire with a smile and a white dress. She kept reading, clicking through files with increasing horror. There were psychological profiles of her father, analyses of his decision-making patterns, assessments of his weaknesses. There were dossiers on every board member of Moore Enterprises, complete with leverage points, affairs, debts, secrets that could be weaponized. Alfred had mapped the entire company like a general planning an invasion, and her pregnancy was just another tactical element, a grandchild to blind Charles to the knife approaching his back. One email made her physically ill. It was from Alfred's attorney, dated 3 weeks ago. Maria remains non-compliant regarding postnuptial agreement. Recommend escalating pressure tactics. Once child is born, custody leverage will be absolute. Charles Moore will sacrifice anything, including corporate control, to maintain access to grandchild. Proceed with phase 3 as scheduled. They were going to use her baby as a hostage, not just against her, but against her father. The child growing inside her was already a weapon in Alfred's arsenal, a piece on his chessboard to be moved and manipulated until he'd achieved total victory. Maria's hand moved to the mouse, her training from years of charity work and social coordination suddenly crystallizing into action. She forwarded every file to her personal email, then deleted the sent messages from Alfred's account. She photographed documents with her phone, downloaded spreadsheets to a thumb drive she found in his desk drawer. For 45 minutes she worked with silent, desperate efficiency, gathering the irrefutable proof her father would need to finally see the truth. When she finished, she sat back in Alfred's chair and placed both hands on her belly. The baby rolled beneath her palms, innocent and unaware that their existence had become the leverage point in a war for billions. She thought about her father's blindness, Alfred's cruelty, her own months of isolation and systematic destruction. The stakes had just become catastrophically clear. This wasn't just about saving herself anymore. It was about saving her father's life's work, protecting her unborn child from becoming a pawn, and stopping a sociopath from destroying everything the Moore family had built. And she had perhaps days before Alfred discovered what she'd found. Maria spent 2 days planning her escape with meticulous care, studying Alfred's patterns the way he'd studied her father's company. He would return from Tokyo on Thursday evening. She would leave Thursday morning, taking only what she could carry and the thumb drive containing evidence that could destroy him. She'd made arrangements with a colleague from her old charity work, someone Alfred hadn't gotten yet, who'd agreed to let her stay in a guest house in Connecticut. She would go there, contact her father from a secure location, and finally make him see the truth. Wednesday night, she packed a single bag and hid it in the back of her closet beneath winter coats Alfred never touched. She charged her phone fully, withdrew the maximum daily cash allowance from the ATM using a credit card Alfred didn't monitor closely, and went to bed rehearsing her route. Penn Station, Metro North. Disappear into normalcy until she could fight back from a position of safety. Thursday morning arrived with crystalline clarity. She waited until 7, when the morning doorman would be distracted by the building's rush hour, and dressed in her most unremarkable clothes. Jeans, a loose sweater that accommodated her now prominent belly, flat shoes designed for moving quickly. She retrieved her bag, checked that the thumb drive was secure in her pocket, and walked toward the penthouse's private elevator with her heart hammering against her ribs. The elevator button didn't respond when she pressed it. She pressed it again, then again, her finger jabbing with increasing desperation. Nothing. The display screen that usually showed the elevator's location remained dark. She pulled out her phone to call building maintenance, but there was no signal. Full battery, but the bars had simply vanished as if the network itself had been erased. Going somewhere, darling? Alfred's voice came from behind her, and Maria spun around so fast she nearly lost her balance. He stood in the hallway leading from the bedroom, fully dressed in a suit despite the fact that his flight wasn't scheduled to land for another 4 hours. He'd never left for Tokyo, or he'd returned early, or he'd never intended to go at all, and the entire trip had been a test she'd just catastrophically failed. I asked you a question. His voice remained pleasant, conversational, but his eyes were arctic. Where exactly were you planning to go with that bag? Her mouth went dry. I needed some air. I was going to visit. Please don't insult both of us with lies. He walked toward her with the unhurried confidence of a man who'd already won. Did you really think I would know the moment you accessed my computer? My study has 3 separate security cameras. Maria, I've been watching you for days, wondering what you'd do with your little discovery. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. He'd known. He'd known since the moment she'd found the evidence, and he let her believe she had a chance just to watch her scramble. The elevator, remotely disabled, along with your phone's connection, the building's Wi-Fi, and the penthouse's landline. I control the building's security system. Darling, I controlled it since we moved in. He gestured casually toward the windows. The smart glass is locked in privacy mode. No one can see in, and you can't signal out. Every door is magnetically sealed. You're not going anywhere until I decide you can leave. Maria's hand moved protectively to her belly. The baby kicked, as if sensing her terror. You can't keep me prisoner. Your father thinks you're emotionally unstable. We've established that quite thoroughly, haven't we? And now, if you were to suddenly appear making wild accusations, you'd simply be confirming everything my carefully crafted narrative has suggested. A pregnant woman, hormonal and paranoid, unable to distinguish business arrangements from conspiracy. Alfred took another step closer. Did you really think you were the first person to try to outmaneuver me? I have proof, evidence of everything you've done. You have a thumb drive that you believe contains evidence. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an identical drive, holding it up like a prize. But technology is so unreliable, Maria. Files corrupt, data disappears. And I'm afraid your father's IT team will find that the emails you claim to have discovered were actually clever forgeries created by someone trying to damage both my reputation and yours. Someone unstable. Someone who needs help. The trap closed around her with perfect precision. Every move she'd made, every plan she'd formed, he'd anticipated. She was a chess piece who just realized the board itself was an illusion. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to understand your position." He was close enough now that she could smell his cologne, see the absolute absence of warmth in his expression. "I want you to stop fighting what's inevitable. Your father's company will be mine. Your child will be mine. You will be mine. The only variable is how difficult you choose to make this process. I'll never stop fighting you." Alfred smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing she'd seen yet. "I was hoping you'd say that. The Grand Bellevue Gala is this Saturday. All of New York society will be there, including your father. I've decided it's time to teach you a very public lesson about obedience. Something memorable. Something that will finally make Charles Moore see that his daughter needs his protection. Protection that I'll graciously offer provide in exchange for certain corporate considerations." Maria felt ice spread through her veins. "What are you going to do?" "What I've always done. Whatever is necessary to win." He turned and walked back down the hallway, pausing at the doorway to look back at her. "The penthouse will remain sealed until Saturday morning. I suggest you rest. You'll need your strength for the performance I have planned. And Maria," his smile widened, "don't bother trying to access that thumb drive. I replaced it while you were sleeping last night. All you have now is baby photos and nursery furniture catalogs." I thought the symbolism was appropriate. The electronic lock engaged with a soft click as he disappeared into the master suite, leaving her standing by the disabled elevator, trapped in her gilded cage with nowhere left to run. Saturday morning arrived with the cold precision of an execution date. Maria had spent 2 days trapped in the penthouse, Alfred's presence a constant weight, even when he was in another room. He'd been almost cheerful, humming while he reviewed seating charts for the gala, taking phone calls about lighting arrangements and sound systems with the enthusiasm of a director staging his masterpiece. She was the star of the production, though she didn't yet know what role he'd scripted for her. At noon, a team arrived at the penthouse, a stylist, makeup artist, and someone Alfred introduced as a wardrobe specialist. Maria sat in the bedroom while they worked on her like she was a mannequin, applying makeup with theatrical precision, curling her hair into elaborate waves that spilled over her shoulders. The dress they brought made her stomach turn. Pale blue silk that clung to her pregnant form, elegant and expensive and utterly vulnerable. It was beautiful. It was also a costume for whatever nightmare Alfred had planned. "Perfect," Alfred said from the doorway, watching the stylist make final adjustments. "Innocent, fragile, exactly the image we need." Maria met his eyes in the mirror. "Whatever you're planning, it won't work. Someone will stop you." "Stop me from what?" "Taking my pregnant wife to a charity gala, showing her off to New York society." He walked behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders with proprietary possession. The stylist and makeup artist carefully avoided looking at the interaction. "You become paranoid, darling. It's concerning." While they finished her hair, Alfred laid out his own clothes with meticulous care. A suit in charcoal gray, a white shirt, a leather belt she'd never seen before that made her skin crawl. He was preparing for something, every choice deliberate. When the styling team left, he locked the bedroom door behind them and turned to her with an expression that mixed anticipation and cruelty. "I've thought about this moment for weeks. How to make Charles Moore finally understand that you need saving, that his precious daughter has married someone dangerous. How to position myself as both the problem and the solution." He walked to the closet and emerged with a length of decorative rope, the kind used in expensive drapery, dyed a deep burgundy that matched the gala's color scheme. "The beauty is that everyone will see it happening, but they'll be too shocked, too paralyzed by social convention to intervene immediately. And by the time your father arrives, fashionably late as always, the lesson will be complete." Maria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You're insane. You can't assault me in front of 300 people and expect." "Can I? Watch me." He coiled the rope with practiced efficiency. "You'll be beautifully displayed, appropriately distressed, and I'll be the monster who finally reveals himself. Your father will be forced to choose between his company and his daughter's safety. And we both know which he'll choose, especially with his grandchild involved. Alfred checked his watch. "We leave in 2 hours. I suggest you compose yourself. Tears are fine, but I need you conscious and present for full performance." While Alfred showered, Maria retrieved her phone from where he'd returned it that morning. Its connectivity mysteriously restored now that escape was impossible. She had perhaps 10 minutes before he'd noticed her absence from the bedroom. Her hands shook as she opened her messages, scrolling past the dozens of contacts who'd abandoned her, looking for the one person who'd always answered her father's calls even when Charles himself wouldn't. Margaret Chun, her father's executive assistant for 23 years. Maria composed a message with desperate care, knowing Alfred would check her phone before they left, knowing she had one chance to make this work. Margaret, confirming Dad's ETA for tonight's gala. The tribute video starts at 8:15 sharp. Would hate for him to miss seeing the family presentation Alfred planned. It's at 8:15. Really important he's there by 8:15. Let me know his arrival time. She sent it, then immediately deleted the message from her sent folder and blocked Margaret's number, hoping it would look like a failed text rather than a completed one. If Margaret understood, if she recognized the desperate repetition for what it was, a woman tried to ensure her father witnessed whatever horror was coming. Then maybe Charles would arrive in time. Maybe someone would stop this. The shower turned off. Maria dropped her phone on the bed and returned to the mirror, staring at her own reflection. The makeup made her look porcelain, breakable. The dress made her pregnancy prominent, her vulnerability impossible to ignore. She looked exactly like what Alfred needed her to be, a victim beautifully prepared for public sacrifice. Alfred emerged from the bathroom, saw her standing there, and smiled with genuine pleasure. "Exquisite. You look absolutely perfect for what's coming." He checked his phone, scrolling through messages with satisfaction. "Your father's confirmed for 8:30. The tribute starts at 8:15, which gives me exactly 15 minutes to conduct our little lesson before he arrives. Timing is everything, Maria. By the time Charles Moore walks through those doors, you'll already be broken, and he'll be desperate enough to give me anything I want." She placed both hands on her belly, feeling the baby move beneath her palms. In 3 hours, everything would either end or transform into something even worse. She thought about Margaret, about whether a block number could still deliver a message, about whether her father's assistant would understand that 8:15 repeated 3 times was a desperate woman's attempt to save herself. Alfred offered his arm like they were simply going to dinner. "Shall we? Our audience awaits." The grand Bellevue ballroom had been transformed into a cathedral of wealth and power, every surface gleaming with the kind of excess that made poverty feel like a moral failure rather than an economic condition. Maria moved through the crowd on Alfred's arm, feeling the weight of 300 pairs of eyes assessing her pregnant form. Her pale blue dress, the tremor in her smile that she couldn't quite control. Conversations paused as they passed, then resumed in lower tones. Everyone sensed something electric in the air, though none of them could have guessed what was coming. Alfred was magnificent in his performance, playing the attentive husband with such conviction that Maria almost believed it herself. He brought her sparkling water, laughed at the appropriate moments during speeches, kept his hand possessively on the small of her back. To the casual observer, they were the picture of powerful matrimony. Only Maria felt the tension in his grip, saw the anticipation gleaming in his eyes as 8 o'clock approached. At 8:10, Alfred guided her toward a section of the ballroom that had been cordoned off with velvet ropes, telling curious guests it was for a special presentation. The lighting in that corner was different, theatrical, with spotlights positioned to illuminate a space that looked almost like a stage. Maria's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized he'd planned this with the venue, that the ballroom's layout itself was part of his design. "It's time," Alfred whispered in her ear, his hand tightening painfully on her arm. "Remember, the more you struggle, the more convincing this becomes." He positioned her in the center of the illuminated space, and before she could process what was happening, he'd pulled her wrists together and begun wrapping them with the burgundy rope he'd shown her earlier. The crowd's chatter diminished as people turned to watch, confusion rippling through the ballroom. Someone laughed nervously, assuming this was part of the evening's entertainment, some avant-garde performance art that wealthy people pretended to understand. "Alfred, please," Maria said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear, her voice breaking with genuine terror. "Don't do this." "Sure, darling. You need to learn." His voice carried across the now silent ballroom, amplified by acoustics he'd clearly tested in advance. He secured her wrist to a decorative column, the rope tight enough to restrict, but positioned carefully to avoid her pregnant belly. The vulnerable presentation was intentional, calculated to maximize horror while protecting his future leverage, the child. The ballroom had gone completely silent now, 300 people frozen in collective disbelief. This wasn't performance art. This was something else, something their social conditioning hadn't prepared them to interrupt. A woman in a red dress near the front held a champagne flute halfway to her lips, her mouth open in shock. A waiter had stopped mid-step, his tray of canapes forgotten. Alfred stepped back, reaching for something he concealed earlier near the column. When he turned back to face the crowd, he held a leather riding crop, the kind used in equestrian sports, expensive and brutal. The sight of it sent a collective gasp through the ballroom. This was no longer ambiguous. This was violence about to unfold in real time. "For 100 times," Alfred announced, his voice eerily calm as he addressed the crowd like they were shareholders at a presentation. "That's how many times my wife has defied me, disrespected me, attempted to undermine everything I built. For 100 times she's needed correction. Tonight, you'll witness what happens when patience runs out." He raised the crop, and Maria saw her own death in his eyes, not physical death, but the annihilation of everything she'd been. She pulled against the rope, her pregnant belly heaving with panic breaths, and heard herself scream for help that she knew wouldn't come. The crowd remained paralyzed, trapped between horror and the social convention that insisted they not intervene in a domestic situation, that what happened between husband and wife was somehow private even when displayed on a public stage. The crop began its descent. Then the ballroom doors burst open with enough force to echo like a gunshot. Charles Moore stood in the doorway, his suit disheveled as if he'd been running, his face transformed into something Maria had never seen before, pure, incandescent rage mixed with devastating understanding. He must have received Margaret's message, must have understood the desperate repetition of 8:15, must have abandoned his planned 8:30 arrival to get here early. His eyes took in the scene with a rapid assessment of a man who'd spent his life reading boardrooms and balance sheets. His daughter bound and terrified, a crop raised above her, 300 witnesses frozen in shock, and the son-in-law he trusted revealing himself as a monster Maria had been trying to show him for months. The champagne flute Charles had been holding slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor, the sound crystalline and final in a horrified silence. Alfred froze mid-motion, the crop still raised, his expression shifting from theatrical cruelty to genuine shock as he realized his timeline had collapsed. "Get away from my daughter." Charles's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of empires. He moved into the ballroom with the focused intensity of a predator, and every person in his path instinctively stepped aside. "Get away from her right now, or I will destroy you so completely that people will forget you ever existed." Alfred lowered the crop slowly, his mind visibly recalculating, trying to find an angle that salvaged his plan. "Charles, you don't understand. Maria has been unstable. I understand everything." Charles had reached the cordoned area now, his hands already working to untie the rope binding Maria's wrists. "I understand that I failed my daughter by believing you. I understand that every warning she gave me was true. And I understand that you have approximately 60 seconds before I make the single phone call that ends your life as you know it." Maria's hands came free and she collapsed against her father's chest, 6 months of isolation and terror finally breaking through in wrenching sobs. Charles held her with one arm while pulling out his phone with the other, his eyes never leaving Alfred's face. "You're finished," Charles said quietly and began to dial. Charles Moore made 7 phone calls in the next 12 minutes, and each one dismantled a piece of Alfred Jackson's carefully constructed empire. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make threats or explain himself. He simply deployed the full machinery of power that came from 40 years of building one of America's most formidable corporations, and he did it with the cold efficiency of a man who'd finally understood the stakes. The first call went to his chief legal counsel, a woman who'd spent 2 decades navigating corporate warfare and didn't ask unnecessary questions. "Rebecca, it's Charles." I need immediate emergency injunctions freezing all joint accounts and business entities associated with Alfred Jackson. Every shell corporation, every subsidiary, every offshore account he's touched. I want it done before the markets open Monday, but I need preliminary freezes within the hour. Yes, I'm aware of the time. Wake up every judge on our retainer list. Alfred stood 15 feet away, still holding the crop, his expression shifting from shock to calculation to something approaching panic as he began to understand what was happening. He opened his mouth to speak, but Charles held up one hand in a gesture that demanded silence, then turned his attention to the second call. David, I need forensic accountants at Moore Tower within the hour. Full audit of every transaction Alfred Jackson has touched in the last 3 years. I want paper trails, digital footprints, and evidence packages prepared for both civil and criminal proceedings. Spare no expense. This is priority alpha. Maria stayed pressed against her father's side, her hands still trembling from the rope burns on her wrists, watching Alfred's face as each phone call landed like a surgical strike. The ballroom crowd had begun to fragment, some guests edging toward the exits, others pulling out their own phones to capture what was clearly going to be the biggest scandal of the year. The woman in the red dress had set down her champagne and was filming openly now, her shock transformed into hunger for a story she'd dined out on for months. The third call went to the FBI. Charles identified himself, explained it had evidence of corporate fraud, embezzlement, and potentially racketeering involving a multi-million-dollar scheme, and offered to make himself and his daughter available for immediate statements. He spoke with the flat effect of a man reporting a traffic accident, but Maria heard the fury beneath it, tightly controlled and all the more dangerous for its discipline. You can't do this. Alfred finally found his voice, though it came out strained, nothing like the smooth confidence he'd worn all evening. We have contracts, legal agreements, joint ventures that were obtained through fraud and coercion. Charles didn't look at him, already dialing the fourth number. Every agreement you sign with Moore Enterprises is void as of this moment. My attorneys will argue fraud and inducement, duress, and breach of fiduciary duty. You'll be fighting legal battles on 17 different fronts by Tuesday morning, and you'll lose every single one of them. The fourth call was to the board of directors at Alfred's primary investment firm. Charles spoke briefly, formally, informing them that Moore Enterprises was immediately withdrawing all capital investments and would be pursuing legal action against the firm for enabling fraudulent activities. He recommended they distance themselves from Alfred Jackson with extreme prejudice, unless they wanted to be included in the coming litigation. The call lasted 90 seconds and likely cost Alfred his primary source of operating capital. Security personnel had begun entering the ballroom now. Not the venue's regular staff, but men in dark suits with earpieces who move with military precision. Charles's personal security team, Maria realized, summoned by one of his calls. They positioned themselves in a loose perimeter around Alfred, not touching him yet, but making clear that his freedom of movement had just become negotiable. The fifth call went to a contact at the New York Post. Charles provided a brief statement about his son-in-law's attempted assault on his pregnant daughter in front of 300 witnesses, mentioned the ongoing criminal investigation, and offered exclusive access to the full story in exchange for responsible reporting. He was shaping the narrative even as the event unfolded, ensuring that Alfred's carefully maintained public image would be destroyed as thoroughly as his finances. Alfred's phone began buzzing incessantly in his pocket. Maria could see the notifications lighting up the screen to the fabric of his suit. Messages from business partners, calls from attorneys, alerts from financial institutions. The machine Charles had set in motion was already cascading through Alfred's network, and everyone connected to him was scrambling to cut ties before the contagion spread. Charles, please, let's discuss this rationally. Alfred's voice had lost all its authority, become almost pleading. I'm your grandchild's father. We're family. Whatever Maria told you, you're not family. You're a threat that I failed to identify because I mistook ambition for partnership. Charles made his sixth call, this one to building security at the penthouse complex where Maria had been imprisoned. He instructed them to deny Alfred access to the residence, change all locks and security codes, and pack his personal belongings for pickup at a location to be determined. Everything you own in that apartment will be in storage by morning. You'll never set foot in it again. 2 NYPD officers entered the ballroom now, summoned by Charles's earlier call to the FBI, which had been routed to local authorities for immediate response. They approached Alfred with professional courtesy, but unmistakable intent. One of them spoke quietly, informing him that they needed him to come to the precinct for questioning regarding assault and fraud allegations. Alfred looked at the crop still in his hand, as if seeing it for the first time, then let it fall to the floor with a clatter that seemed obscenely loud in the tense silence. Charles made his 7th and final call, this one to a crisis management firm that specialized in protecting corporate reputations. He instructed them to prepare a comprehensive media strategy that positioned Moore Enterprises as the victim of a sophisticated con artist, emphasized his daughter's courage in exposing the fraud, and made clear that the Moore family would be cooperating fully with law enforcement. He ended the call and finally turned to look at Alfred directly. "You gambled that my love for my company was greater than my love for my daughter. You were wrong." Charles's voice was quiet, almost gentle, which somehow made it more terrifying. "By Monday morning, you'll have no business, no reputation, no assets, and no freedom. Every person in this room witnessed what you tried to do. Every phone captured it. You built your entire plan on the assumption that I would choose wrong, and now you're going to spend the next decade paying for that miscalculation." The officer stepped forward, and Alfred Jackson, billionaire, sociopath, architect of his own destruction, was led from the ballroom in handcuffs, while 300 witnesses watched in stunned silence. The man who'd orchestrated 400 acts of cruelty had been dismantled by 7 phone calls, and the love of a father who'd finally opened his eyes. 3 weeks after the gala, Maria sat in her father's study, not the corporate office with its panoramic views and power dynamics, but the smaller room in his Connecticut estate where he kept his personal books and photographs from before the empire consumed everything. She'd been staying in the guest house on the property since that night, recovering in a space that felt neutral. Neither her father's domain nor the prison Alfred had constructed around her. Charles entered carrying 2 cups of tea, a domestic gesture so unlike him that Maria almost smiled. He set one in front of her and took the chair across from the desk rather than behind it, a small concession to a quality that she noticed and appreciated. The rope burns on her wrists had faded to pale lines, but they both knew the deeper wounds would take longer to heal. "The divorce papers were filed this morning," he said, without preamble. "Rebecca structured it so that Alfred has no claim to anything, no assets, no custody rights, no contact provisions. He'll be fighting criminal charges for the next 2 years at minimum. The fraud case alone has 17 counts." Maria placed one hand on her belly, now 7 months rounded and active with a child who kicked whenever she felt stressed. "What about Moore Enterprises? The damage he did will take time to untangle, but the company will survive. I've installed new safeguards, restructured the board, brought in external auditors." Charles paused, his hands wrapped around his teacup, and for the first time in Maria's memory, he looked uncertain. "But that's not what I came to discuss. I need to apologize to you, and I need to give you something I should have offered from the beginning." "Dad, you don't have to." "I do." His voice was firm but not controlling, a father speaking rather than a CEO issuing directives. "I failed you, Maria. When you came to me with evidence, with proof of what Alfred was doing, I dismissed it because it didn't fit the narrative I constructed. I wanted to believe that every powerful man operated like me, that ruthlessness in business didn't translate to cruelty in private. I was wrong, and my blindness nearly cost you everything." Maria felt tears prick her eyes, but she didn't look away. "You came when I needed you. You saved me. I came late. I should have believed you months earlier. Should have investigated the first time you showed me fear instead of trusting a man whose only recommendation was that he made me money." Charles set down his tea and pulled a leather folder from the desk drawer, sliding across to her. "This is a trust document. Everything I own, the company, the properties, the investments, it's all being restructured. You'll have independent control over your portion immediately, not when I die, not contingent on any conditions. Your child will have protected trust that neither I nor anyone else can access or manipulate." Maria opened the folder, scanning legal language that essentially transferred enormous wealth and power into her control without strings attached. "This is more than protection. This is you giving up control of your own legacy. This is me acknowledging that you're not a child who needs managing or an asset who needs protecting. You're a woman who survived something horrific and still had the strength to gather evidence, to fight back, to save not just yourself but the company I built. He leaned forward, and his expression held something Maria had rarely seen: vulnerability. I raised you in a world where marriages were strategic and emotions were weaknesses. I taught you to seek validation from powerful men instead of trusting your own instincts. That conditioning nearly destroyed you, and I have to live with my role in that. You didn't know what Alfred was. I didn't want to know. There's a difference. Charles stood, walking the window that overlooked the estate's gardens. Real protection isn't about control, Maria. It isn't about bodyguards or prenuptial agreements or teaching you to defer to powerful men. Real protection is giving you the resources and freedom to make your own choices, and then supporting whatever you decide, even when I disagree. Maria felt something shift inside her chest, a weight she'd been carrying for so long that she'd forgotten it was there. The need for her father's approval, for external validation of her worth, for permission to trust her own judgment. It was dissolving in the face of his admission that his judgment had been catastrophically wrong. I want to raise this baby independently, she said quietly. Not in your house, not under your influence or anyone else's. I want to discover who I am when I'm not performing for a husband or seeking a father's approval. Charles turned back to her, and instead of the argument she braced for, he simply nodded. The guest house is yours for as long as you want it, or I'll help you find somewhere else entirely. Whatever you need. My only ask is that you let me know my grandchild, not as a more dynasty heir, but as a person, and that you call me if you ever need help. Knowing I'll give advice, but respect your decisions. Even if my decisions are mistakes. Especially then. That's what real protection looks like. Letting you fall and helping you get back up, rather than building a cage and calling it safety. He managed a small, sad smile. I'm told that's what good fathers do, though I'm learning rather late. Maria stood, her belly making a movement awkward, and crossed to embrace him. Charles held her carefully, as if she were something precious he'd almost lost. And for the first time in years, the hug felt like connection rather than performance. Over the next 3 months, as her pregnancy advanced and Alfred's criminal trial began making headlines, Maria slowly rebuilt her life on her own terms. She found a small apartment in Brooklyn, far from the Manhattan social circles that had abandoned her. She hired her own attorney, not one of her father's, to handle the final divorce proceedings. She attended prenatal classes alone, and when other mothers asked about the baby's father, she simply said he wasn't in the picture and found that the truth was less painful than any elaborate lie. Her daughter was born on a Tuesday morning in April. 8 pounds of furious life that Maria held against her chest and knew she'd protect with everything she had. Charles came to the hospital, brought flowers instead of financial advice, and asked permission before holding his granddaughter. He stayed for an hour, then left because Maria looked tired, and texted later simply, "She's beautiful. You're going to be an amazing mother." Maria named her Evelyn, after no one in particular, claiming the right to begin a story that wasn't burdened by dynasty or expectation. In the quiet of her hospital room, watching her daughter sleep, she understood that the price of her dependency on external validation had been devastating, but that the strength she'd found in surviving was entirely her own. She'd been beaten down 400 times, psychologically, socially, emotionally, and she'd emerged knowing her worth wasn't determined by her father's empire or her husband's cruelty. It was determined by her own choices, her own courage, and the fierce love she felt for the tiny person whose future she now controlled absolutely. That, she realized, was true protection, and it had been inside her all along.